Well, I come from a musical family, and it was that way when I joined it, which was a little later than everybody else. My brother, when he brought his future wife home, said to a friend before they left college to come up to Huron, Mick said, "My mom's going to love Linda. She's white, she's Anglo-Saxon, she's Protestant, and she's soprano." And that was not too far off from the mark. I grew up singing in church. I grew up singing around campfires. I grew up singing in our home. It was a major part of our life together, and it was a major part of the family that Carol and I created together. And I began to see the power of song one night when Levi was we were living in St. Paul, so he must have been 3.5 or 4 years old. And we were driving along in the car, and he was sitting in his car seat in the back seat, and Carol and I were singing "By the Waters of Babylon" as a round. Do you know that song? By the waters of Babylon, we sat down and wept for thee, Zion. And we stopped that song, and this little voice piped up from the back seat and said, "What does wept mean?" And we said, "Well, wept means crying or cried." And he said, "Why are they crying?" So we kind of boiled down the story of the exile in Babylon and said that they were far from their homes and they were really homesick and they really wanted to go home, and it made them very sad. And so they were singing a very sad song. And Levi said, "I wept once when I went to a Presbytery meeting and I wanted to go home." And I said, "I feel you, son." But what was powerful about that is that he picked up not only on the words in the song, but he picked up on the emotional power of that song. It's in a minor key. It is very sad. It's singing about a sad thing. And he picked up on that sadness, and not only did he pick it up, but he was able to think about his own experience of sadness, a parallel experience, and feel the song out of his own experience. He was able to join people who have been dead for 3,500 years in their feeling of homesickness, and to feel it in terms of his own lived bodily experience. And he was 3.5, and I tell you this story not to tell you how smart my son was, though he really was really smart, and sensitive and all that stuff, but to talk about the power of music, but the power of song in particular, to touch us at levels that we cannot otherwise be touched at. I have another memory from my own childhood. I went to church camp at the Highlands Camp up east of Cleveland. I learned a lot of things at church camp that my mom didn't know that I learned at church camp. Important things, but not what she sent me there to learn. But I also learned about friendship there. And the last night that we were there for this particular year of camp, I think I was 13. I went to the junior high camp for the first time, and it was pretty exciting. And we were sitting around the campfire, and we sang some Jesus songs. We sang, Amazing Grace and things that people pretty much knew the words to. But we were singing kind of the last song that we sang was a popular song at the time, a Peter, Paul, and Mary song called "Leaving on a Jet Plane," which was real popular then. And it was the first time that I ever sang harmony without like music in front of me. Like I sang in choir, and I was an alto first and then eventually a baritone. And I could read music and sing parts. But that was the first time that I ever listened to the melody line and invented my own, and harmonized with the melody kind of on my own, which is something I had noticed that my parents and my older siblings could do, and I wondered when I would ever be able to do it. And I remember feeling that there was this connection between me and these new friends of mine on this last night together, singing that very sad song about a lover who's leaving their loved one on a jet plane. And we were leaving each other not on jet planes, but we were leaving each other, and we got that connection and the sadness and the minor key of that song. And then there was something about having that experience for the first time of not just singing what everyone else was singing, but singing a harmony below what they were singing. And if any of you have ever done that, it's like a kind of heart dancing, It's like you're not doing exactly the same thing, but you're creating together with other people something that has never been before, which is really like what friendship is, And so in that moment, as a 13-year-old, I had that experience of creating a thing suddenly just off the tops of our heads that was somehow helping me to touch this other thing that we were doing together, which is coming together, becoming friends, becoming close, and then learning how to live through or lean through the grief of having to part, which is all part of being a human being. And I want to suggest to you that it was that song, and even though it wasn't a God song, in a sense, in that moment, in that context, it was a God song. Because that singing allowed us to integrate things within ourselves, but also to integrate our hearts together and articulate, not exactly, but to articulate what we had become to each other. Music has that power, but singing has that power in spades. Which I think is why the psalmist, writing 1,500 years or 2,500 years ago, says to us, sing a new song to the Lord. Dance, timbrels, harps, make music before the Lord. Because of the power that song has, of the actual physical act of creating music out of your own body and out of your own throat and out of your own lips and mind and heart. The making of music is a basic human function, and it is absolutely essential to the ways in which we tie ourselves together, the ways we integrate ourselves within ourselves, the way we integrate ourselves together as a community, and the way in which we tie ourselves to God. I want to suggest to you, those of you who are absolutely sure that Jonah was a real guy and that really happened, then you also need to believe that when the psalm says, sing a new song to the Lord, it's not a metaphor. He means sing a new song to the Lord. Because singing is fundamental. Clearly, it's fundamental to our faith life. In the song, By the Waters of Babylon, which I think is Psalm 139, 136. You're the Bible person. You're supposed to know that. But it's the psalm that the Israelites sing from exile. It's one of the most powerful and most disturbing psalms because they said, we sat down by the rivers of Babylon and we wept. We wept for thee, Zion. They were homesick. They were distraught. And the people of Babylon asked us to sing one of the songs of Zion. But how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land. Singing was clearly essential to the ancient Israelites around and before the exilic period because Israelite music was famous in the Middle East. Other people knew about it. They talked about it. The music that happened in the temple, the playing of cymbals, the playing of tambourines, the playing of stringed instruments, the singing of songs. The songs of Zion were famous. Like other people's big, tall buildings and other people's temples and other people's, wonders of the world, what Jerusalem and the temple of Yahweh were known for was this amazing worship that was making a joyful noise. That has been foundational in our faith and our faith practice since long before Jesus. And obviously after Jesus, because the writer of the letter to the Ephesians, when he's telling people how to live their lives, how to be people of faith in a difficult and evil world, he talks to them about living in the light and not doing frivolous things and not engaging in debauchery and drunkenness, but to allow themselves to drink of the Spirit. And the way that you do that is to sing hymns and spiritual songs together and raise prayer in your hearts and on your lips. That's how you do that. That's how you live in a world, is by raising your voice together in praise of God. And of course, singing goes way back beyond the experience of the Israelite people. Anthropologists say that there is no human culture anywhere on the planet, anywhere that you go, whether it's Africa or Papua New Guinea or Northern Europe or Asia or wherever. There is no culture, there's no group of people that don't sing. And the anthropologists suggest one of the theories about singing was that it evolved out of keening. It evolved out of the wordless but emotional expression of deep grief at the loss of someone or something important and essential. That when human beings were first figuring out how to use their voices in ways that would feed their emotional need, singing emerged out of that already existing connection between the voice and the heart. And singing has never lost that connection. The reason that it's so important is because it uses every aspect of ourselves as a human being. The words come out of our brains, or at least they're stored there and then they get taken out and used from our brains, but not just our brains, but our hearts, because the music and the words together draw out really essential aspects of what it means to be a human being, what it means to be filled with joy, what it means to be overcome by grief and sadness. And it includes our body, because you can't sing without a body. As many choir directors over many decades have taught me that most singing should start from here and not from here. That it's the whole instrument. And it's an act of intelligence. You got to pay attention to what you're doing, but it's also an act of heart. You have to feel it. I can't tell you how many choir rehearsals I sat through where the choir director was trying to get me to feel the meaning of the text, even if it was in Latin or German or some language I didn't speak, but to feel it and let it come out through the music. And when that happens, it is like one of the most amazing experiences, both to create it and to hear it. So singing is this thing which integrates us, mind, heart, body. But it's also a thing that joins people together with each other. to sing, whether it's in unison or whether it's in harmonies or whether it's all off key and it sounds hideous, it doesn't matter. When we sing together, when we do that integrating thing in such a way that we integrate ourselves with each other, we feed each other. You know, when I sit next to somebody, it doesn't matter whether they know how to sing or not. It doesn't matter whether it sounds good. But when I stand next to somebody else who's singing a song that I know and is singing it really loud, like they mean it, like they actually believe what they're singing, when I have that experience, I sing louder. And I feel it more intensely than I felt it before because I have it reflecting back at me from the people around me. And I know that people have that experience when they sing next to me. There is no experience that I have in worship that I love more than this one, and it doesn't happen very often. But when I'm in church with my wife and my 3 sons and their spouses and now their children, the harmony, the blending of voices, the blending of hearts around something that, a belief that we share is like the most powerful thing I can even imagine. So it integrates us in ourselves and it integrates us with each other. But singing uniquely allows us to bring this and this together with this. It joins our hearts with the heart of God in a way that nothing else can do. It is a singular gift of God. And again, if you're Johnny One Note, you can't sing for anything, and you think it's hideous, you don't even sing in the shower because you're afraid to offend yourself, it doesn't matter. If God gave you only one note, the reason he gave you that note was so that you would sing it in praise of him, in chorus with people you love. So, I often hear, oh, you don't want me to sing in church? It's terrible. I do it as a favor. I do it. No, I don't sing out in church. Forswear that foolish cant, as Dickens would say. Because it's nonsense. God doesn't care whether you can carry a tune. God wants to see your heart and your mind and your body and your friends gathering together in a spiritual harmony that is beautiful to him. So why am I preaching this sermon now? Why am I telling you these things? What's the itch? The itch is that in the last generation and a half or 2 generations, technology has begun to steal our voices from us. We went from my parents in their generation, when they were teenagers and they got together with their pals, they did not have iPhones. They did not have iPads. They didn't have Walkmans. They didn't even have a stereo. If they wanted music, they made it. They sat around a piano and they sang songs together. They sang harmonies together. That does not happen anymore. If you've ever done any youth work, getting a bunch of teenagers to sing together is like the hardest thing in the universe. And I think they're poorer for it. I sang with my friends. We also listened to records. But it's gotten worse over time. The recording industry and the broadcast industry has stolen our voices. And now people grow up thinking, oh, I can't sing because I can't sound like the person that I admire who is a great artist. And you know what's really ironic? Is that even she can't sing like that record. Because they use computers and all kinds of technological equipment to, if she sings or he sings an off-key note, the computer can fix that afterwards. So what you hear on your iPod or your iPhone, nobody sings that way. You can't sing that way. Even that artist can't sing that way. If you heard them singing in person, you wouldn't think it was even them. So it's kind of a fake thing. It's like it's not even real. And it has stealing our voices. It's taken the place of the music that we used to make together. And I'm not just being a Luddite here. I'm not just being somebody who's an old fart and, hates technology. I think something really essentially human is being lost because we don't sing together anymore. And in fact, this room is one of the last places, not just this room, but rooms like it, are among the last places in our culture where people get together and raise their voices together and have that experience. So I think it kind of needs to be part of our sense of evangelism. I can remember pastor colleagues saying in the past, it's not our job to teach people to sing. And I got that, yeah. Our job is to preach the gospel and bring people to Christ and all that stuff. But now in retrospect, I think that guy was dead wrong. I think teaching people to sing is a part of our job. Because singing and making music is one of the key ways in which we get side by side with ourselves. And we get side by side with each other, which is an awesome experience in this isolating and alienating world that we live in. And most importantly of all, it brings us side by side with the Spirit of God and puts us in touch with the God who created us and the God who redeemed us. I think it's an essential tool and experience for the life of faith. So you guys are actually better singers than most congregations, I'll just tell you that. But sometimes I stand up here and I look out and I see people just standing there during the songs and not opening their mouths. Stop it. For one thing, and guys, I have to tell you, I'm talking to you. Somewhere along in this thing there came this lie. Really a lie. Satan started this story, I'm pretty sure. That there is something not masculine about singing. That in order to be a guy's guy, a man's man, you gotta somehow sing off key and not sing. It's related to the whole idea that you're not supposed to have emotions and you're not supposed to show the emotions, which is also a crock. But it's a lie. I know that because I grew up in a household full of men who sang, and they all grew up in households full of men who sang. And so figuring out what my voice part was going to be was really a critical piece of my coming into manhood, was my voice changing and becoming a baritone. Maybe you didn't grow up in that household, and that's fine. But the idea that it's not masculine to sing, it's just a lie. And when I look out across here and I look at the people who aren't singing, a lot of the people who aren't singing are adolescent men and boys. Guys, it is your job to show by your example that singing praises to God in the company of God's people is part of what it means to be alive. It's part of what it means to be a Christian and a child of God. And the louder you sing, the more likely they are to hear you. And if you're the parent or the grandparent of an adolescent boy who's not singing in church, do this. Or a young man who's not yet an adolescent, make him sing. In Huron Church, I sat in the third pew from the front right over here with an old lady named Grandma McCormick. She wasn't really my grandma, but I sat with her in church every Sunday because my parents were in the choir. No surprise. And she was a sweet lady. And she would let me lie in the pew with my head in her lap, and she'd rub my back and run her fingers through my hair, and it was like, I want to go to church. But when the hymns came along, or when the prayers came along, or when the creed came along, she insisted that I stand up with everybody else and that I do what everybody else was doing. So I grew up because, I wanted to stay on the good side of Grandma McCormick for the back rubs. So I did what she said for the rest of the service. But I learned how to do that by doing that. they're not here yet, so I won't embarrass them, but I watch the Sellers here on Sunday morning. And Wes sings, and his wife sings. And those kids stand up on the pew between them, and they sing. And I was watching your granddaughters singing. Was it last Sunday or was it at the wedding? But they not only were singing, but they can't read yet, and they knew the words. Somebody's doing a good job. So my point is, singing is not optional, and you don't have to be qualified. If you have one note, sing the one note. If it's off key, let us deal with that. Sing it loud. If you're an opera singer, sing really loud. But the rest of us, don't be embarrassed, because what God wants is that thing which happens in our bodies when we raise our voices in song. That's the beautiful thing. And that thing that happens between us where we give each other energy, that's the beautiful thing. That's the harmony that God is looking for. And then that feeling when we're all joined together and we're integrated in ourselves and we are approaching the throne of God together, when that happens perfectly and without flaw, that's heaven. And you don't want to miss it. Thanks be to God.